Samson calls upon all his magnificent strength in his efforts to find his missing queen, held captive as a dancing slave. But a diabolic murderer plots to destroy Samson. Then Zorro, the daredevil masked swordsman, joins forces with Samson to help rescue their queen.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And today we're talking about Samson and the Slave Queen from 1963.
Samson and the Slave Queen was directed by Umberto Lenzi, with a screenplay by Umberto Lenzi and Guido Malatesta, produced by Fortunato Misiano for Romana Films, and distributed by American International Pictures.
Samson and the Slave Queen stars Sergio Chianti, better known to us as Alan Steele, as Samson, Pierre Brice as Ramon / El Toro / not Zorro, Moira Orfei as Malva, Maria Grazia Spina as Isabella, Andrea Aureli as Rabek, Massimo Serato as Garcia de Higuera,
Andrea Scotti as Pedro, Aldo Bufilandi as Decor, Ignacio Balsama as Joaquim, Attilo Dotesio as General Saveria, Loris Gizzi as Don Alvarez, Rosy De Leo as Carmencita, Nello Pazzafini as Rabek's henchman, and Nazareno Zamperla as Sedak.
Before we start, I'd like to mention that we were unable to locate the original AIP cut of Samson and the Slave Queen, and what we watched was a band-dubbed version of the English soundtrack onto the Italian cut that we found on YouTube.
And some of the portions of the film we watched weren't part of the AIP version, but we saw them anyways, and so we may comment on them.
So our story begins at a palace that kind of resembles an old hotel, and the princesses Malva and Isabella are introduced.
They're coming down separate staircases, and are opposites in both looks and temperament. Golden-haired Isabella goes to greet her cousin Malva, the Dark, but gets snubbed for her troubles. Malva sails right past her without a second glance.
So instead, Isabella goes to Ramon. She is very pleased to see him. And Malva calls over Garcia. And she complains that he isn't giving her any attention. And he reminds her that they were together all night, and he wasn't the one who wanted to leave. But she says that's right, and reminds him that he's only the palace guard, at least for now.
Malva has nothing nice to say about her cousin Isabella. Then the Supreme Chancellor Don Alvarez comes in with grave news of great import. King Philip of Nagara has died of the plague on the island of Guadarrama. The Chancellor will assume temporary control of the government until the king's will, in which he names his heir, is read. And now it's a toss-up to whether Isabella or Malva will be Nagara's queen.
Isabella is shocked by the news of her uncle's death.
Malva, though, is all business. She's asking how long she's going to have to wait until she finds out if she's the queen or not.
The Chancellor goes on to say that the will is being transported by an escort commanded by General Saveria.
And we cut straight to the general, with no further ado. He and his men are strolling down a road. One of the officers says that he'll be glad when they reach the sea. His men need a rest. But General Saveria says that they have a very delicate mission that he wants to complete in the shortest time possible. His men can rest once they reach the shore. Another soldier suggests that they send out a scouting party, but the general thinks that Rabek and his rebels couldn't be anywhere near them. Rabek's on the run and he's no threat.
But unfortunately, the general could not be more wrong, because nearby, Rabek and his band of merry men have caught sight of this escort.
But one of Rabek's men suggests that they're carrying gold, but Rabek is betting that they have something much more valuable.
Back at the palace, Garcia is taunting Malva. He says that the will surely will have named her cousin Isabella as the queen, and this would ruin their plans for the future. Malva accuses him of only wanting her to become queen so he can marry her and share the throne, but he insists he's only thinking of her happiness.
And then he suggests that he could intercept the will before it is read. If Isabella's name is on it, they can scratch it out or just make a whole new will and write Malva's name in instead. Malva thinks that it should be easy enough to swap the old with the new.
She tells Garcia to bring her the will, and he says he can send some guards to attack the convoy. But no, that wouldn't be inconspicuous enough, and everyone would know what they were up to. They would need to find the right person to pull this off. Someone who is capable and has exceptional strength.
And where will we find such a specimen? I'm glad you asked, because now we cut to Samson, who's doing stupid strongman tricks for the masses, as a little girl looks on rapturously.
Yeah, Samson appears to be working in a sideshow of some sort, and a carnival barker announces to the gathered crowd that Samson will be breaking the chains. He flexes his chest, and the chains do indeed break. Garcia is there in the crowd, and he challenges Samson to bend a steel bar. Samson asks what's in it for me, and Garcia holds up his purse and says, "I'll give you this." So Samson holds the bar over his head and bends it with ease. He takes his winnings and gives it to the barker and tells him to give it to the doctor for his daughter.
I was going to say granddaughter, but we don't know.
The daughter asks Samson to stay. Apparently he's been staying with them. But he says he must go, but he'll come back and find her when she's well again.
Garcia demands that Samson come see the Princess Malva. So, with no other options, he does. Samson has a private meeting with Malva and Garcia, where she calls herself the heiress to the throne. And then, after Garcia clears his throat, she introduces him as well.
Malva tells Samson that she's heard of him, and she knows he comes from far away, and so he might not be aware of who she is. And he says he isn't, but he would like to know the reason he's been brought here.
She says she can't tell him very much, but there is an important scroll inside a case that he needs to retrieve for her. She leads him on to believe that inside that scroll case are military secrets, which she, as the true heir to the throne, will need. And if he will do this for her, she will give him a reward with her own hand.
This sounds like a good deal to Samson. Samson don't do this strongman stuff for free, you know. She sends Samson down to the armory to await further instructions. Then Garcia asks about the prize she promised, and she shows him. A tug of a rope from a ceiling reveals a trap door on the floor.
And that trapdoor leads to a rapid descent away from the castle. In the palace garden, Isabella and Ramon are strolling together. Isabella is griping that Ramon is going away to publish his poems. Why does he have to do it now when she needs him the most? Ramon asks if she thinks that Malva is scheming against her, and Isabella says, probably, and then correctly guesses what Malva is attempting to do. Ramon suggests that she go to the kingdom of Astoria and ask for a man called El Toro. He'll be able to protect her.
He says El Toro is brave and smart, and an all-around good guy and swordsman. Ramon is certain he'd help her. Ramon goes to leave, but before stepping into his carriage, he tells Isabella that there's a man named Joaquim in Astoria who knows all about El Toro.
The next day at the Casa del Posta, Isabella walks in and is greeted, and she asks for that Joaquim. Soon enough, Joaquim shows up at Isabella's table, but he has bad news. El Toro's been convicted of a capital crime, and he will soon be executed.
Isabella says that her village is much more civilized and they would never execute a prisoner. Joaquim tells her it sounds like a nice place and that El Toro is his best friend and he would do anything to help him. So this trip was a bust. Isabella is now returning home when she notices the carriage is going faster than usual. She yells out to the driver asking if everything's all right, and the driver says everything's fine, don't worry about it.
He must not want to worry her because they are being chased. And in the front of that chase is a man in black. He rides in front of the carriage, stopping it, and then goes up to talk to Isabella.
Buenos dias, señora. Are you looking for me? Before she can tell him, El Toro sees guards approaching, so he sends his horse off, and Isabella tells him to hide in her carriage.
She figures that he probably didn't do whatever it is that he's accused of. Then the guards roll up to the carriage and ask Isabella if she's seen El Toro. She misdirects them up the road. Now alone, she wonders how he escaped execution. And he says that he heard she was looking for him, so he got away.
All joking aside, he wants to know what he can do to help her, so she explains the situation with the scroll. Speaking of which, the convoy only has to cross a gorge, which will bring them to the sea, and beyond that is the kingdom of Nagora.
Yeah, General Severia and the men are congratulating themselves. They're almost there, but just then, Rabek gives the signal, and arrows fly. Many of the general's men are punctured by arrows immediately, and the rest must try to duel their way out of this situation. One last thing remains to be done. Rabek finds the general, runs him through with his sword. As the man lies on the ground, he takes the scroll case out of his grasp.
Couldn't have gone better, men, he says. Let's go.
Well, they steal the army's supplies before they do, and their pack mules.
It's not too long before Samson comes across the remains and carnage.
He hears a man moaning. Samson goes to him and asks him where the scroll case is. That's the only thing that matters. The general croaks that Rabek has it just before he dies.
So now Rabek and the thieves are at a pub. Rabek is wondering what treasure might be within this scroll case, because it's sealed and peeking would spoil the surprise.
But whatever it is, only he will be cashing in on it. But just then, Samson is there, and he pulls away the post where all the horses are tied up. The horses stampede away, still tethered together, and chaos ensues.
Samson starts fighting the men, and they all come at Samson one at a time so they don't stand a chance against him. El Toro rides up to watch, but he stays out of sight.
And then Samson and Rabek find themselves alone in the pub. And of course they fight. Samson is the better of the two. He grabs Rabek's sack, and climbs out of the window. But he doesn't see El Toro waiting nearby, even though he walks right past him.
Rabek's gang reconvenes, realizes that Samson has taken the scroll case, and so they give chase. So now Samson is walking through a field on his way back to Nagora. He nearly trips over an animal trap and takes a drink from a well. It is at this point that El Toro makes his presence known.
El Toro calls out to Samson to leave the bag and run. Samson demands that El Toro take off his mask to show Samson who he's fighting, but El Toro won't reveal his face to anyone, though he does introduce himself by his hero name.
He says, "What? You can say anything about me, but not that. Here I am, amigo." As he jumps from the brush, he has his sword drawn, so Samson grabs a pole from the well, and they start to duel.
It looks like El Toro may have the advantage, and El Toro demands the bag and sword point. And Samson's about to comply, but then he smiles as he looks behind El Toro. Samson gives up the bag, and El Toro gloats at him, but as he steps back, he falls into that animal trap without the bag. Now he's in a hole, and he's sackless.
Samson grabs the sack, laughing at the predicament of his adversary.
El Toro vows that they will meet again, and they will.
Now we're back at the palace, and a man is receiving 50 lashes. Garcia tells the guards to take him down to the solitary dungeon to die in peace.
Up in the palace, Malva is trying on the throne, and she likes how it feels. Garcia tells Malva that soon this will all be hers. Everything will go in our favor. But then Isabella walks in. She tartly chastises Malva for getting ahead of herself. She's not the queen yet. Isabella wants to know why she had old Esteban flogged. He was an old family servant who deserved to be respected and cared for.
Garcia said that he was the one who had given the order, so there must have been a good reason. Malva says he was rude toward her, and that he refused to call her Her Majesty. Isabella reminds Malva that she's not the queen, and the matter won't be settled until the reading of the will.
She advises Garcia to free Esteban as soon as possible, or she'll tell the Chancellor. And then she storms out of the room. Malva promises to make her pay for that. Garcia tells Malva, make her eat something inaudible, your feet. We're not sure what he really said. And then he says, but it's only a question of days till everything is settled, because Samson will not fail us.
Speaking of Samson, he arrives at a festival of some sort. People are wearing masks, and Samson asks the man where he can find a boat, and the man tells him that he needs to look for Captain Rodriguez. So he asks where he can find Captain Rodriguez. The man says he's around here someplace. Go find him.
He asks someone else and is told to talk to the man in the devil mask. So he does. He finds the man in the devil mask, sits down with him and his entourage, I guess, and asks to be taken to the ship, to Nagara. But the devil tells him, just cool your jets for a bit, while everyone carouses a while longer.
He explains that he doesn't always look like this, only at carnival time.
So Samson joins the party and enjoys some exotic local dancing. While his attention is elsewhere, the devil roofies his drink, a glass of water, and peer pressures Samson into drinking it.
Samson's vision grows cloudy as the dancing girl continues her gyrations. Eventually, Samson slumps his head onto the table, and Captain Rodriguez swaps a fake scroll for Samson's scroll.
It's a pretty credible imitation of the case. Then El Diablo tells his accomplices to keep their yaps shut, and they say, don't you worry, you devil, we haven't seen anything.
Then Captain Rodriguez goes upstairs and takes off the devil's mask. We still don't know who he is because he's wearing a mask under the mask.
But it's El Toro, of course. Now we're back downstairs where the dancing continues, And then another masked man, surrounded by his masked posse, comes into the inn. They see Samson slumped on the table, and they pull him up and drag him out of there, laughing all the way.
From upstairs, El Toro hears their laughter and looks out the window to see what's going on. The masked men remove their masks. It's Rabek and his men.
Well, of course. Rabek is telling his men to take care of Samson, and then to meet him on the ship. El Toro hears all this and says, "No, you don't deserve to die like that." And then he tucks his scroll. He almost puts it in a dresser drawer, but he thinks better and stuffs it under the mattress. And then he goes after them.
Rabek's men are still dragging the groggy Samson through the woods. They take him through a cave.
El Toro is close behind when this happens. Just inside the cave, one of the men says, "Why don't we kill him here?" And the man in charge of this band says that he deserves a better death than that, and puts him in a cell. I don't know why there's a cell in a cave, but there is.
They leave him, and Samson awakens and finds himself face to face with an alligator.
A large, stationary rubber alligator. It opens its massive fake jaws to greet him.
Samson grabs a torch that was conveniently left for him, and he waves it at the alligator.
But someone off-screen throws a bucket of water on him, and Samson's torch is doused.
Outside, El Toro has caught up to Rabek's gang, and he takes them all on.
He's fencing everyone, and he's winning. One of the men outside hollers back into the cave that they need help. Samson, though, is still facing the gator.
The alligator is opening and closing his jaw and wagging his tail at him. So Samson picks up a rock and drops it on the gator's head, killing it.
A giant fake rock on the giant fake alligator. Then the leader of this away team, who is opting not to wait around for El Toro to stab him through the heart, ducks into the cave. He's surprised to see that Samson is alive, one, and out of the cell, two. So he and Samson have a bit of a wrestle. And of course, Samson wins.
By now, El Toro has finished fighting everyone outside, and he goes after the runner. Samson ducks out of the way and sneaks past El Toro as he enters. El Toro calls out to Samson, but there is no answer.
Samson makes his way back to the tavern, where his kidnapping happened. He asks the keeper about Captain Rodriguez, and the man says you'll never find him. He's traded his devil mask for a black pirate costume. But the innkeeper gives away the fact that he was staying in room 5. So Samson flies up the stairs to do a little light burgling. He tosses El Toro's room, eventually finding the scroll case under the mattress. We knew it was there. Here I question, how did Samson know that Captain Rodriguez and not Rabek had the scroll? Or maybe he didn't remember being in Rabek's presence because he was drugged. We're not sure.
El Toro returns to the inn, and the innkeeper tells him his large friend was looking for him, and that he's up in El Toro's room. El Toro rushes upstairs, but is stopped by a talking donkey. The donkey asks him to have a drink with him, but El Toro blows him off. Laughing, the donkey goes outside and removes his mask. It's Samson! It wasn't a donkey at all!
He made an ass of himself. He gleefully escapes with the scroll, or so he thinks. Then we cut to some ships at sea, and over it a title card reads Nogara. We're finally back in Nogara.
We see Rabek being escorted to the palace by the palace guards.
But before we find out what he's up to, we're going to visit Isabella in her chamber, where she has a visitor. It's Ramon. He sees that she's been reading, and reading his book. She says she loves the poems he wrote and that he must be really in love with the woman who inspired those passionate words. Ramon says very much more than he can say. Ramon says that he can only love this woman and suffer. Isabella says that he doesn't have to suffer, ... And then they finally drop the pretense and admit that they both like each other. Like each other.
He asks her to run away with him to Paris, but she says that she can't leave her people. Plus, she wants to stay to see who the new queen is going to be.
Yeah, let's see how this all plays out.
Besides, if she stays, she might get to see El Toro again.
Ramon looks hurt, and she asks if he's jealous of El Toro. And he admits that he is. But then she kisses him and makes it all better.
Rabek is being escorted by Pedro to see Malva and Garcia. She knows who Rabek is, a rebel, liar, blackmailer, and assassin, and she isn't impressed. She asks him how he'd feel if she sent him to be tortured, and he says he thinks it would be a mistake, and that he didn't come here to learn about her penal system.
No, he says he has a certain case in his possession, and that gets Garcia's attention. Malva asks if he opened it, and Rabek says no, he would never. It still has the royal seal on it, and it wouldn't be valuable if it didn't. Malva wants it, but of course, Rabek wasn't dumb enough to bring it with him. He will get it if she meets his conditions, freedom for him and his men, and 1,000 gold coins.
Garcia tells him he'll have his reward. And where is the scroll? And Rabek says he left it in hiding with his men.
Rabek wants Garcia to follow him alone, or else they'll never get the gold. And then he leaves.
Now Samson is in a tavern. This one has a more strict dress code, so Samson has donned a leather vest.
You can still see his nipples, though.
He hits on the waitress there. He literally says, "What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this?" She tells him her name is Carmencita and that she's covering for her friend, but her regular gig is as a servant for Isabella at the palace. The royal palace? Asks Samson.
No, the peasant palace, you ninny.
She confirms that it is indeed the royal palace.
Samson asks about the other princess, Malva. Carmencita hesitates and then says the most politically expedient thing that she can. She likes Isabella more. She's generous and kind, and Samson can't get any more out of her. So he asks her if he can escort her to the palace when her shift ends.
Carmencita says that she would be very disappointed if he hadn't asked.
She goes off to wait other tables, and then Rabek's men come into this tavern. Samson sees him and ducks down to hide his big face from them.
Garcia sends some of the men to stand guard, while he and Pedro and Rabek head upstairs. Samson stalks off and follows them.
But Carmencita sees him go upstairs, where customers aren't supposed to be. She follows him. Once caught, Samson asks for her help, saying that he'll give her lots of money and she'll be helping her country. And with no further details, she immediately agrees to this.
So in one of the rooms, Garcia is asking Rabek for the scroll. Rabek asks if they brought the gold.
Garcia says yes and gives Rabek a bag of gold. Rabek has to count it first, though, and he spills the gold on the table. Carmencita takes Samson to another room, which has a window that looks down into the room where Rabek and Garcia are, so they can view the proceedings.
Rabek is taking his time counting the money, so Garcia tells him to hurry up.
And what they see is Rabek dropping a coin, retrieving it, and getting twice stabbed as he stands up.
Rabek screams, "Help, Santos, help!" Downstairs, Rabek's men recognize his sissy screams, and they start a bar brawl. The swords are drawn, and Rabek's men face off against the palace guards.
One of the rebels makes his way upstairs. Samson tells Carmencita to go wait outside, and she does. And this is when Garcia gets a good look at the scroll case, noticing that it does not have a royal seal on it. He opens it up and finds a parchment inside. When he unrolls the parchment, it's blank, except for the signature, Zorro.
Who isn't even a character in this movie. This short sequence was not dubbed in English in the version we saw, and likely was not part of the AIP cut. As I said, Zorro wasn't in this movie.
I guess I can't overdub a piece of paper. And then Samson looks at his scroll case, and he gloats a little.
So now Carmencita has brought Samson to the palace. Carmencita says he looks worried, and he says that he is, and maybe someday he'll tell her about it. They're in a hall with many suits of armor. Samson notices that one of these suits of armor is holding a mace, and that the handle of this mace kind of resembles a scroll case. So he takes the mace, pops the top off of it, replaces it with the scroll, and puts the scroll with the mace head back into the hand of the suit of armor.
And he tells Carmencita to remember what he did in case something happens to him. And I'm not really sure how that worked out so well for him, but it did. So moving on. As he leaves her, he passes Ramon in the hallway. And then he does a double take when he hears Ramon greet him. And if you can't guess why that is, you haven't been paying attention.
Then Pedro comes to escort Samson to Malva. This next sequence is not dubbed into English, but it seems pretty important to the plot, so I can't imagine that it wasn't part of the AIP cut, where Samson is in the presence of Malva and Garcia, and Samson shows them the case, which is actually the handle of a mace.
He brags that he's never failed a mission yet. He hands Malva the mace handle, thinking she's as dumb as he is, but she's not. She opens the trap door, and he falls into the pit. Inside the pit are skeletons. So it's been used before. Garcia and Malva open the mace handle, which does have an opening. This is so weird. And they discover that they've been hoodwinked, which makes them regret dumping Samson down that hole.
So now Garcia and Malva are in that hall with all the suits of armor.
So she and Garcia send men down to the dungeon to retrieve Samson.
And Garcia ponders, I wonder what he did with that scroll, standing inches away from where Samson had hidden it.
And then Malva thinks fondly of the torture she's about to inflict on Samson. I think she's really into that stuff. And down in the dungeon, Samson is attempting to break out, as Garcia and Malva's soldiers decide to break in, because they gave that jailer 4 seconds to find the key and he wasn't able to do it.
Once they're through the door, the guards start to give chase. but figured that Samson's already escaped to the sea by now, so they decided to go back up.
They looked for several seconds and didn't see him. And they didn't look very hard because he was just in the room with them on one of those prison bunks, I guess. But he was lying behind a skeleton, so that must be why they missed him. Haha, those fools only had to turn their heads to see Samson's bulky form on an upper bunk in the room.
Yeah, I don't think it would be easy for him to hide behind a skeleton.
No.
So he jumps down and follows them out. So Garcia reports to Malva that Samson is dead. He died while trying to escape into the sea. And they both agree that El Toro is the one they want now anyway.
And she wants Isabella arrested too. Garcia just needs to make up some charge like planning to usurp the throne. Garcia seems a bit turned on by her wicked ways and agrees to do what she asks.
And in her room, Isabella is brushing her hair when El Toro jumps in through the window. He tells her that she can do whatever she wants to him because he's failed in his mission. He explains that there was another man after the scroll, likely under orders of Malva, and his name is Samson. Isabella doesn't know Samson, but she has heard of him.
Well, who hasn't? El Toro thinks the scroll is likely somewhere there in the palace. So Isabella is thrilled to learn that she's still in the running for queendom, and she believes that El Toro will find the scroll. But just then, Garcia pounds on the door. El Toro heads for the window, but before he leaps through it, he says that he'll be here if she needs him.
Garcia comes in and tells Isabella that she's under arrest. She wants to know on what charge, and Garcia tells her that she was trying to usurp the throne by having the scroll stolen and replaced. And they have proof. She demands to see the Chancellor, and Garcia shows her the Chancellor's signature on the arrest order. As she's taken away, El Toro comes back into the room. He sees the palace guards escorting the Chancellor down the hall.
Garcia's men are detaining the Chancellor, who definitely did not sign Isabella's arrest warrant, and El Toro follows them as they walk off.
So Samson is still wandering around the dungeon area, and he hears Isabella being brought down. Malva comes down to taunt her.
She wants the scroll case. Isabella says that she knows nothing about that, and that no threat from Malva and Garcia will change her mind. They tear off, but tell the guards to sound the alarm if anyone comes down there. Samson has been eavesdropping all this time from a wine cellar, but unfortunately, after a guard comes in and retrieves a bottle without seeing Samson, he locks the door behind him, and Samson is trapped.
Now upstairs, Malva and Garcia are discussing their situation. Malva knows Isabella won't respond to torture, so maybe they can just get the Chancellor to name Malva Queen. El Toro is hiding behind a tapestry and hears everything.
The next day is Malva's coronation ceremony, but Don Alvarez, after a few false starts, refuses to crown Malva. He won't go against the law, so for refusing, Garcia has him arrested. He asks the other man there, Don Manuel, if he has any reservations about crowning Malva. Apparently not.
Garcia orders that the guards be doubled and stand outside the palace. So now there are only 4 palace guards and Paco left guarding Isabella. Samson hears this from inside his wine cellar hideaway. He has an idea. He yells out, "Help me! I'm dying! Help me!"
And those 5 men, Paco and the other 4, go up to the wine cellar, open it up. And of course there's another fight, another brawl, and Samson wins. He doesn't knock them all out though. He just makes it so they're in the wine cellar and he locks them in.
Then Samson pops open the door to Isabella's cell. He introduces himself and apologizes for working for Garcia and Malva. But now he'd like to make amends and help her.
He didn't realize how evil and schemy Malva and Garcia were. As they're escaping, 2 men try to stop them, but they are shish kebabbed by Samson's steel rod that he threw through them. More of the guards surround Samson and Isabella, and all looks lost. That's until El Toro joins the battle. That's all Samson needs to assure victory.
Back at the coronation ceremony, things still aren't moving as people are questioning the legality of the ceremony.
As well they should. Samson and El Toro easily take out all the palace guards, all 30 or so of them. Samson cartoonishly knocks out the last of the guards, and he and El Toro shake hands. Good game, guys.
And now the 2 of them and Isabella can all be friends. Outside, the ceremony continues. The crown is about to be placed upon Malva's head when El Toro runs in. He says to stop what they're doing. Besides, it's illegal. So Garcia orders El Toro's arrest. This results in more fighting.
Then we get to see what Samson has been up to. He's hopped up to the roof of the castle. He grabs the drawbridge chains and pulls them up. Any guards on the drawbridge have to jump off. And he closes the door so that no one else can come in and join the fight.
Eventually, the fight comes down to a duel between El Toro and Garcia, as Malva and Isabella look on.
But Garcia gets skewered and Malva is all alone. El Toro says now Isabella can be queen, but Malva whines, "No, you can't. I won't permit it."
She says that they don't have proof because the scroll has yet to be produced. And then a smug Samson walks in and says, "Is this what you're waiting for?" He just strolls over to the suit of armor with which he had left the scroll, but the mace is missing. He accuses El Toro of playing games, and El Toro accuses Samson of the same.
It looks like a deadlock situation until Carmencita comes in. She didn't just remember what Samson did, she undid it. She has the scroll.
Isabella asks Carmencita to read the scroll. She pops open the case and breaks the seal.
And she says, "Isabella is Nogara's next top monarch." Not really. She calls her Majesty, and evil Malva makes one last gesture of bad will, pulling a dagger and going for Isabella. But El Toro stops her before she can stab her cousin.
Isabella says Malva could be executed for trying to assassinate the queen, even though she said they don't do that in her kingdom when she was talking to Hakim earlier.
Well, this is treason, not just simple larceny.
But Isabella is going to forgive Malva. After all, that's what her uncle, the former king, who was just and wise, would have done. But the deed cannot go unpunished, so Malva is sent into exile.
And we're almost at the end. We see our new queen, watching Samson doing his street magic show from the relative safety of her carriage. And she has bangs now because she's been through some stuff.
Samson sees Isabella and walks over to her carriage. Isabella says that she wanted to thank him, but he disappeared before she had the chance. He tells her it's not necessary, that it's his destiny to fight evil, fighting danger, and helping the weak, and always alone. She says that maybe one day he'll find some company, and he smiles, then kind of rolls his eyes and shakes his head as he turns away from her.
It's like a yeah, whatever look. And then in a undubbed portion of the movie, Samson goes to get his horse, and there's a groom there. But not just any groom. This is Carmencita. She turns around and whips off her hat and greets him, and they kiss, and Isabella smiles watching all of this.
Isabella is on her way back to Nogara, but her carriage is stopped by El Toro. He asks Isabella to marry him, and she's flattered, but she says she loves another.
"That silly poet?" asks El Toro. She says, "Don't you talk that way about him. I forbid it." And then she starts to cry. Then El Toro asks if she really, really loves Ramon, and she says yes.
Then El Toro removes his mask. It's Ramon. Ramon was El Toro the whole time.
Oh my God, I'm so surprised.
So he is able to accept his reward after all.
And then they kiss and I guess live happily ever after. That's the sort of thing that happens in these movies.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, where we've been discussing Samson and the Slave Queen from 1963.
Samson and the Slave Queen was filmed in Italy and released under the title Zorro Contro Maciste. The film was shot at Castello Ruspoli, Viganiello, Viterbo, Lazio, Italy, and those aren't all different places, that's just one place.
Easy for you to say.
It was not.
Maciste is one of the oldest recurring characters in cinema, and was the hero in many Italian movies from the 1910s to the 1960s. Maciste is thought to be a surname of Hercules, or Heracles, and director Giovanni Pastroni chose the name for his movie Cabiria, based on his understanding that the name was a more erudite synonym for Hercules.
In time, the name's origins were largely forgotten, and the name came to be thought of as related to the Italian word macino, M-A-C-I-G-N-O. I may not be pronouncing that right, but it means large stone. In a later film, Maciste is showing materializing out of a wall of solid rock, thus cementing that connotation.
Zorro, or as he's redubbed here, El Toro, was a character created in 1919 by pulp fiction writer Johnston Macaulay as a masked vigilante protecting his people, the indigenous settlers of the California area. Zorro is one of the earliest examples of a fictional masked avenger with a double identity, a predecessor to the Lone Ranger and Batman.
Like most of the Italian epics distributed by AIP, the music score got a Les Baxter makeover. The main title takes some music cues from the Sacred Crown sequence of Goliath and the Barbarians of 1959, and then the opening scene, which was originally unscored, now is a slow orchestral version of the Goliath main theme. A fair amount of the original Angelo Francesco Lavigno score is retained, like the lively tavern dances. AIP did repurpose Lavigno's main title score by moving it to the end of the film for the end titles.
Samson and the Slave Queen was released on August 23, 1963 in Italy, and on December 18, 1963 in the United States. The New York premiere was on March 4, 1964.
The trailer alleges that the plot involves the mighty Samson using all his strength in effort to find his missing queen, held captive as a dancing slave, and this is over the footage of the tavern girl dancing. But as we know, she's neither slave nor queen.
The AIP press book touted the double feature of Samson and the Slave Queen and Goliath and the Sins of Babylon by promising that movie fans were never exposed to such awe-inspiring scenes, rich in color and lush in costume, from the times when men were mighty and their numbers were many.
The press book also includes this fun fact. Alan Steele does 250 push-ups every day to keep in shape. They also tell us that Moira Orfei only used eye makeup on screen, but it took her an hour each day to put it on before appearing in front of the cameras.
Taglines for Samson and the Slave Queen include, "He was the strongest man on earth. She was the tigress of an empire."
He smashed an army to free the virgin princess. AIP suggested that theater owners used costume muscle men and Amazon-sized girls as ushers during the engagement, promising that the uniqueness of big youngsters in full regalia would be good for a newspaper story and picture. They also recommended an audience poll, asking whether men looked better with beards or without, drawing a distinction between bearded Alan Steele as Samson and the clean-shaven Mark Forrest as Goliath. And they thought owners could maybe find a chariot and a driver in their town, because who doesn't have those lying around, to use as a literal promotional vehicle for the films.
For the week of December 18, 1963, Goliath and the Sins of Babylon and Samson and the Slave Queen were the 10th and 11th highest-grossing pictures in the U.S., with $56,000 in ticket sales that week for the double feature. But by the end of 1964, Samson and Goliath both hadn't quite broken into the top 200 films for that year, earning only $126,000 between the two of them.
From contemporary reviews, Howard Thompson of the New York Times reviewed both films of the double feature, saying, "As middle-brown entertainment not meant to be taken seriously, Goliath beats Samson hands down. As for Samson and the Slave Queen, Thompson poked fun at AIP's title, asking, 'Where is the Slave Queen? There isn't a one to be found on the entire premises of this old-fashioned, prettily colored and costumed, and pleasingly mounted dud.'" But he did give the movie credit for having the dubbed English almost matching the actor's lip movements.
Variety declared the film to have enough vim and vigor, thanks to a spirited performance by Pierre Brice as Zorro, to please the less demanding beefcake and biceps aficionados. The rest of the review found that Lenzi focused on keeping the cast moving with emphasis on the fighting, and the rest of the cast outside Brice was only adequate.
Ouch.
Many of the players in Samson and the Slave Queen would appear in other features released by American International Pictures, most of which were direct to television in American International television packages.
Alan Steele, who played Samson, appeared in Hercules and the Masked Rider in the AITV Epicolor 64 package release. He was also in Hercules Against Rome and Lost Treasure of the Aztecs.
Moira Orfei as Malva appeared in Revenge of the Conqueror from 1961, which was part of AITV's Epicolor 64 package, and Fire Over Rome from 1965, which ended up in AITV's Epicolor 65 package.
Maria Grazia Spina as Isabella appeared in Revenge of the Conquered, and also The Masked Conqueror from the AITV Epicolor 64 package. Also in that package were Mask of the Musketeers and Hercules Against the Mongols.
Andrea Aureli, who played Rabek, would appear in Hercules and the Black Pirates and Hercules Against Rome, both from the Epicolor 64 package, and Goliath at the Conquest of Damascus from the Epicolor 65 package.
Massimo Serrata as Garcia de Higuera appeared in Brennus, Enemy of Rome from the AITV Epicolor 64 package. Also in that package, starring Serato, was Challenge of the Gladiator, also known as Colossus and the Gladiator.
Andrea Scotti as Pedro had appeared in Attack of the Moors in 1959, Samson and the Sea Beast in 1963, and Lost Treasure of the Aztecs in 1964, which were all part of the Epicolor 64 television package, Hercules and the Tyrants of Babylon from 1964, which was in the Epicolor 65 package, and the theatrical release The Italian Connection in 1972.
Aldo Buffilandi as Decor was in Samson and the Sea Beast, and also appeared in Midas Run, a 1969 Cinerama/AITV feature. And lastly, he was in Super Stooges vs. the Wonder Women, which came out in 1974.
Ignacio Balsamo as Joaquin had appeared in La Dolce Vita in 1960, of which AIP released an English dubbed version. Mask of the Musketeers in 1963, Hercules Against Rome in 1964, Lost Treasure of the Aztecs in 1964, and Goliath at the Conquest of Damascus and Giant of the Evil Island, both in 1965 and part of the Epicolor 65 TV package.
Attilio Dotesio as General Severia appeared in Brennus' Enemy of Rome, Samson and the Sea Beast, Hercules Against Rome, and Giant of the Evil Island.
Loris Gizzi as Don Alvarez appeared in Guns of the Black Witch in 1961. He also appeared in Queen of the Seas from 1961, which was part of the Epicolor 64 television package, and Hercules and the Masked Rider, and Giant of the Evil Island.
Rosy De Leo as Carmencita appeared in Samson and the Sea Beast, Lost Treasure of the Aztecs, Hercules and the Tyrants of Babylon, and Giant of the Evil Island.
Nello Pazzavini as Rabek's henchman appeared in Colossus and the Headhunters from 1963 and part of Epicolor 64 television package. He also appeared in Goliath and the Sins of Babylon, Samson and the Sea Beast, Hercules Against Rome, Goliath at the Conquest of Damascus, Giant of the Evil Island, and Super Stooges versus the Wonder Women in 1974.
Nazareno Zamperla as Sadak appeared in The Masked Conqueror from 1962 for AITV and Mask of the Musketeers from 1963. And director Umberto Lenzi directed Queen of the Seas from 1961 for AITV.
So Cheryl, having gone through everything we could find on Samson and the Slave Queen, all that's left is to discuss our opinions of the film. So why don't you tell me yours, using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
Usually I can find some angle from which to approach my feelings about the movie we just watched, but I'm a little lost here. I didn't hate watching Samson and the Slave Queen, but did I love it? I can't say that I did. It does not compare well with the first sword and sandals epic we watched for this podcast, Goliath and the Dragon. That movie had a much more compelling storyline with some supernatural elements, as you'd expect from a movie based, at least in part, on Greek or Roman mythology. But all that gets a little muddled here. Samson is not a character from either of those cultures' mythic legends. He's a biblical character whose name is synonymous with feats of great strength, at least until he gets a haircut. I wonder why, when the movie was retitled, that the powers that be chose to rename Maciste as Samson. Of course, they didn't just do it for this movie. And I should have wondered the same thing about Goliath, which is another name plucked from the Bible and given to a character, which is actually Hercules. Even with all that confusion, it makes more sense for Hercules or Maciste to be mucking about in caves fighting three-headed dogs, centaurs, and even dragons than it does for him to be meddling in dynastic disputes in medieval Spain. Though the character of Maciste does seem to be a time-traveling hero, helping out wherever and whenever his services are required. Can't say the same for Samson, though. At first I wondered what Zorro was doing in this movie, too, but after doing a little research, I found that part of that character's backstory says that the eldest son of each new generation of the De La Vega family, that's Zorro's alter ego's surname, returns to Spain for a period of travel and study, learning sword fighting. Though this timeline doesn't jibe, Zorro's adventures were set in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, and this movie, judging by the costuming, would have taken place sometime in the 1500s. It makes more sense to have him here. Maybe he's the forefather of the family that eventually moved to California. But I don't want to get too bogged down by historical inaccuracies. Obviously, these movies weren't made to chronicle real-life events. At its core, this is a buddy pick. Samson and Zorro eventually put aside their rivalry and worked together to help the rightful heir ascend the throne. And that actually worked for me. I found myself rooting for them to finally be on the same side against the cartoonishly evil Malva and Garcia. And the payoff of that plot element was enjoyable. And I also liked the who's got the scroll shenanigans, although they made up far too much of the film. It would have been an improvement if the script put a little more effort into developing the characters of the two queen wannabes. Instead, they went for the bare minimum. Fair Isabella, the blonde, is good, and raven-haired Malva is evil. For the women, their wig color defines their personality, and somehow both are dead boring, though Malva at least has a trapdoor that leads to a dungeon. That's kind of badass. But what I really wanted in this movie was found in its original title, Zorro contra Maciste. I wanted to see more of those two. I would have liked them to be buddy-buddy for a lot longer. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. All in all, though, I think the touches of humor in the film are what save it from being a bore. Samson and El Toro's efforts to outsmart each other lead to some clever schemes and a few laughs as well. Now, this is going to be a hard movie to find, but if you can, I'd recommend it. It'd be a great movie to watch if you're looking for something that won't overtax your brain. It does deliver some laughs, too. I'm going to give this one an I. I think it's a little higher than that, but I don't think it's quite A caliber. So if I plus is a thing or A minus, it's somewhere in the middle there. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I agree with just about everything you said. Like you, I can't help but compare Samson and the Slave Queen to Goliath and the Dragon, which is a far superior film. And it's probably unfair that Goliath and the Dragon is the standard against which we'll be judging all of these peplum films we'll be watching from this point on in our podcast. But what is it that Samson and the Slave Queen is lacking in compared to Goliath? The biggest issue is there are no real feats of strength to be showcased here. There isn't much spectacle to seeing Samson break chains with his chest and bending a bar or dropping a rock on an alligator puppet. And the setting being Spain a few hundred centuries ago rather than ancient Greece or whatever meant that there were no monsters thrown into the mix. Goliath had to fight against a giant bat, a three-headed dog, a bear, an elephant, and a dragon. Samson finds himself only having to do battle with ordinary men, and he rightly seems a little bored every time he finds himself in a fight. Only once does El Toro get the better of him, and El Toro didn't do so much as win as he just got possession of the scroll and started to retreat. But then he backs himself into a hole, and Samson wins again, if only by default. But this incident means El Toro won't be underestimating his opponent again because he realizes that Samson is both strong and clever. Some of the dubbing is fun, just because it's so odd. The version of the movie we watched was a fan-made dub on YouTube where someone took the English audio, likely from a black and white TV print, and did their best to sync it up to a widescreen Italian color print. It was common for AIP to take these films and cut them to ribbons, inserting shots out of sequence and excising sequences altogether. Not to mention that the two sources are usually in different frame rates, so I know the syncing up of the audio is easier said than done. So I can't comment on the lip-syncing aspect as we were unable to view the actual AIP production. But I can comment on the English script, which is at times hilarious. I could never know whether the humor is intentional or not in some of these films, but sometimes I think it has to be. What comes immediately to mind is the innkeeper telling Samson, "You're still looking for Captain Rodriguez? You mean you haven't found him yet? Well, you're SOL now because he's changed his costume and now you'll never be able to find him."
And then he describes his costume perfectly.
I don't like to judge the acting in a dubbed film because we're really only getting half of the performance. But I can comment on the story, and once again I find myself unfairly having to compare Samson and the Slave Queen to Goliath and the Dragon. While Goliath had a fairly intricate plot, the plot for Samson and the Slave Queen seems overly simplistic. It almost feels like something that K. Gordon Murray might have imported from Mexico to play kiddie matinees. As for the action, and this being an El Toro movie, there was quite a bit of swordplay. But it's really not all that impressive. It's just standard back and forth, either until someone wins or someone backs down. And while I can tell you who wins, I can't tell you how, even after having watched the film twice. In movies, a duel will usually end with either a lucky jab or someone losing his sword and being forced to surrender. But I don't think any of those things happened here, so I can't tell you how they ended. I'd say this was an okay film. I may even watch it again sometime, especially if I am ever able to get a hold of a copy of the true English dubbed AIP cut of the film. Seriously, if any of our listeners out there has a copy, hook a guy up. But even with its potential rewatchability, because of its overly simplistic plot and mostly dull action, I too am going to give Samson and the Slave Queen an intermediate rating of I.
I really hesitated to give it an A. Were you even close to an A on this?
Nope.
Okay. I just remember the laughs. It was very funny, but like you said, probably not intentionally.
Well, I would like to see if the AIP cut is any better. It's probably not because there's probably a lot of stuff that was left out, which would leave it making no sense, but I still would prefer to see that.
I think if we hadn't seen the parts that we weren't supposed to see, we might have been a little confused as to what happened to Samson. The part where he gets dropped into the dungeon would have been cut out.
And the ending with Carmencita wouldn't have been there either. He would just go off alone again. So I think that's all we have on Samson and the Slave Queen. Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.